And this is what imposter syndrome, or in fact, most of the things that we are unhappy about or that we want to be better at psychologically or for the internal world. I want to feel better. I don't want to feel like this. I want to feel excited, but I'm shitting my pants. This isn't fun. I used to be a sprint hurdler as a kid, and I gave up eventually because I would just be throwing up before race. This is not pleasant.
Welcome to the One Moment Longer podcast presented by Any Question. I'm your host, Greg Bennett, and this episode has to be one of my all-time favorite episodes with Dr. Simon Marshall. He just gives so much information, so much education, and in an entertaining and just easily digestible way. It's just truly a remarkable episode. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did, and remember, success comes to those who endure just one moment longer. All right, today I'm joined by a truly accomplished and just multifaceted individual. He's a world-renowned sports psychologist, a co-author with his wife, Lesley Paterson, of the best-selling book, The Brave Athlete, and an Academy Award-winning screenwriter alongside Lesley for the Netflix movie All Quiet on the Western Front. With a strong background in academia as a former professor at the University of California, San Diego, and San Diego State University, he's made a significant impact in the field of sports psychology. His diverse expertise makes him a fascinating guest, and I'm eager to dive into a conversation with him. It's an honor to have him join me today. So welcome, and thanks for joining me on the One Moment Longer podcast, Dr. Simon Marshall. How are you, mate?
Thanks, Greg. So great to be here and to follow my wife. So I'm hoping she didn't land me in it, or you're going to ask me questions that she...
No, it was funny. So Lesley and I were chatting a few episodes ago, and she lost internet at one point. But then you guys came back on, and I could hear you in the background. I'm like, oh, that's Simon. And I obviously know of you, and I know of your work. We have a lot of acquaintances and friends in common. So I think I'm yelling through, hey, Simon, I need to get you on the show. And here you are. So I really appreciate it, mate.
No problem at all. Yeah, I dropped in for a few minutes and I heard her rabbiting on, and then I thought, best to leave her to it.
No, it was great because I've heard your name. We have our friend in common, Dr. Tommy Wood.
Oh, Tommy, yeah.
Yes. So Tommy's been on this show probably 4, maybe 5. He's my go-to guy. He's my doctor that we talk about everything and anything, and he's just really great guy. And I'm pretty sure you guys have done podcasts together, have you? Or you've been on the same?
We have. In fact, we've been part of a few businesses, startups together as well. And we've both consulted for a few sort of medical health, functional medicine related companies. Yeah, he's just a fantastic guy. He's a lovely man in person. Obviously, most of the things that he's always talking to me about, carry more, lift more, do more. He's a big guy. So we often get into that with the endurance exercise. But no, he's a great guy.
That's awesome. So where are you now? You've just traveled back.
We
home,
are
right?
in Los Angeles.
Okay. And mate, I gotta, like I did with Lesley, I gotta send you a huge shout out and just congrats on the film and everything. Has that all settled down? How's it been since?
It has. I mean, the hoo-ha over the film itself has settled down, but what hasn't settled down, in fact, is ramping up, is the next projects, that come about because of the success of All Quiet. Yes. So that's what we're doing, which is all really great problems to have. It's one of those things that we've been dreaming of for over 10 years, and when it finally hits, you're like, oh my God, this is it. This is what we always wanted. And then you're back into the grind. But we're really fortunate. It's been such an amazing experience, the whole thing. Surreal, but amazing.
Yeah, but you got to strike while the iron's hot, right? I imagine in this world, it only takes 6 months and suddenly you've forgotten again. And so when things are going good, go.
Who knows how long the window stays ajar for, but we think at least hopefully for the rest of the year. And if we can just sort of try and really nail in the next projects. Yeah. And it's funny because screenwriting or success in film is a lot like sport. You win one, or you do one big championship event and you do well. And then, of course, the talk is, was it a fluke or who did it? So really it's the second performance that really is the big decider, whether you can repeat it. So that's really the next goal. So we're buckling down, and the only way we know how, and the only way Lesley certainly knows how, is, work hard. It's all about the work, knuckle down and get back to the business.
Good on you. Because I think that, like in sport, I imagine sometimes you even ask yourself the question, was that a fluke? And self-doubt can creep in. But with the tools that you guys have at the disposal, understanding the mind and the power of the mind, has that come into play at all? Have you been kind of having these questions of doubt and then go, hang on, no, keep moving? Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, Lesley and I differ. Our personalities are quite different as well. And she has, and it's funny because there are some differences between men and women generally about how confidence evolves over time. But Lesley, one of the big lessons is that confidence is earned, not learned. And so obviously Lesley's success in sport has given a tremendous confidence. And now I've just watched her confidence grow over the last 20 years. It's really quite phenomenal. And mine has sort of has gone up and down, depending on what I'm doing. And so, but yeah, I think we've used our, you've got to walk the talk as well, right? So we've been using our own tools that we use in coaching, we've used on ourselves, and we're using it for film, and they generalize pretty well, because most of the things that make you successful in sport work in other fields as well. I mean, these are stem cell skills, right? Of confidence and managing your relationship with failure. And so on. So they're not really unique to any one particular industry. So, and that's one of the great things I think about being or having some success in any field, is that they're pretty portable. You can pack them in a case and take them somewhere else.
I love that. I want you to tell me a little bit more about, I didn't know about the men and women and the way we look at confidence, because my wife and I are very different as well. And I'm a bit more like you. I find myself going up, like I'm king of the world, to, I'm kind of, and it's like, I'm curious.
I know. The challenge with all of these, especially when you're trying to make evidence-based statements about things like this, is really hard to nail down the causes. And they certainly don't seem to be genetic. They're probably sociocultural. But one thing that we think is a trend is that men's confidence rises pretty exponentially and quickly through your mid-20s. And then through to when you get to about 30 or 40 and you're the peak of presumably in many instances your professional career, and then it starts to drop off, the midlife crisis or what have you, and you get to mid 40s and 50s. But women's actually, they grow into their confidence, they become more and more. So whilst it's like a bit of a slower burn, because the pressures on women are far different, younger women especially are far different than the pressures on men, and they sort of almost like grow into their identity, and they find that, and Lesley and I are perfect examples of that as well, and I've watched that. So, women's confidence is often peaking at around middle age, and when men's is really sort of on the downward spiral.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, and that's why it's important if you're a guy, have a strong relationship with somebody behind you to keep you empowered, keep you in the ring. That's how I feel when I look at Laura. And we can get into this later, but when I practice my gratitude every morning, and one of the greatest things that I'm grateful for is that Laura keeps pushing me back in the ring. And having somebody that empowers you like that is pretty cool. But mate, before we dive into a lot more of that, I want to recap your journey. And I know you've done so much, but tell me, when did you first find your passion for, sports psychology?
I think probably as an athlete who couldn't cut it. I was a competitive cyclist. I was an elite amateur cyclist, and really wanting to make a career out of it, or at least attempting to make a career out of it. And it soon became apparent that there were a number of things missing in that equation, one of which was talent, physiologic talent, and probably mindset as well. But what was interesting about my journey in cycling compared to someone like Lesley's in sport is that I would have, as most of us do, if you do sports science degrees, you're lab tested up the wazoo, and all my data suggested, oh my God, you've got the raw ingredients, but I just couldn't convert it. And so that to me said that there was probably some psychological issues at play as well, whether it was confidence or self-doubt or a whole bunch of stuff. And Lesley was the opposite. They look at her data when she was sort of 17 or in talent identification programs, and it was like, no, sorry. And she would outperform her data. So we really have these sort of weird opposite trajectories. And I think that for me, that was one of the reasons why I found the psychology. Like, what is it? What do I need? What am I missing that I can't do this? And that started, I think, the journey into learning about how our internal world affects what we do and what we attempt and how we persist and when we quit and give up and how we keep going. And I think that made a big play in it. And then I just fell in love with the science and the science of the mind. And I think that really, for me, that was a huge experience. I remember sort of when I was doing my undergraduate degree, and slowly I started off as a exercise physiology major, actually, and then moved into psychology and started to learn so much more about all of the stuff that you don't really hear about. It doesn't make it into sort of self-help books or the common language of psychology, but it's stuck in the academic journals. And I just found this really fascinating, and on and on. And for me, psychology, it's interesting because in sports science, as you know, whenever you see sports science programs and they think about the determinants of success, and they think of it a bit like that, Trivial Pursuit pie, you've got the biomechanics, nutrition, and psychology, all the sequence. And to me, that was always odd, because psychology, I never see it as, and then you do the psychology work, and then you go back to this, because psychology is a little bit like, when you go to the optician, is A or B better when they're testing your eyesight? And it's the way that we look at everything, the way that our relationship with food and how we eat is shaped by our psychology, and on and on. So really, psychology is a lens through which we look at all these other things, and it affects all these other things and our relationship with them. So for me, it became such a central part of thriving and trying to be better at what you do. And so that's why I think I fell in love with it.
What a great response. I love that. When I had Dr. Tommy Wood on, and he might be stealing your quote here, he might have referenced it, but he said, what you think has a direct impact on your physiology. And it's that quote that I've just kept that in my back pocket. I think I've referenced it probably 100 times in 180 episodes or whatever I'm up to, because I just think it's just so powerful. And it goes to what you're saying. It impacts everything.
It really does. And in fact, even in the last 10 years, and psychology has had quite a few paradigm shifts because of neuroscience, right? And this is sort of more like the biological, neurological study of the brain and its processes. And that's influenced the psychological models. And now many neuroscientists and some psychologists, me included, don't really think of the mind and body as separate. They're really like braided rope, right? They're one and the same thing. And no surprise that our physiologic states, whether it's stress, arousal, affects how we think and feel. And in turn, how we think and feel has a feedback mechanism to our physiology. So ground zero for changing the way you want to think and feel often starts with physiology, which is a bit of a paradigm shift for psychology, where it's always the model has been, if you can change how you think, you can influence how you feel, and then you'll act differently. And the physiological part was always considered, that's a separate domain, and they're really not. They're one and the part of the same thing.
Well, you can feel it. I mean, and when you actually get down to basics, you can actually feel the changes in your body when you think certain ways. And if you can get better at managing the way you think and the way that you take information and process it quickly, you can affect it very quickly. I do have a question for you, though. You mentioned, you had some ability when you did all the tests. Did you ever come to a conclusion of what you were missing on the
psychologically? I think that I've had a fairly not unusual history, but a different one than most of the peers I had at school. I grew up in Africa and in not really seeing a television or people the same skin color as me until I was like 11 or 12. And so I grew up in an environment that was, and the things that we did and played and interacted and cultural norms were very different. And this is in the 70s, of course. But so I think that in many ways I struggled when we moved back to the UK to find my place. I looked and sounded British, but I'd really had not that much affinity for it then. I mean, I probably could have drawn what Britain looked like. I could have drawn Zambia, where I grew up intimately. And so my relationship with that, and I got bullied a little bit because I sounded a bit different. And I think that really shaped how I turned out and how I became my strong need for social approval, which is my own sort of heart of darkness, our screenwriter's term there.
Mate, there's many of us that have that, by the way. So
yeah, I know. I'm sure lots of people do. Yeah. But it does shape you, right? The things that you do and how you look at the world and the types of things you do. And one of the biggest, of course, is your relationship with failure. And so knowing how that I could, and sport is a failure-based business, usually, unless you change your relationship.
Business. I've never heard it framed that way.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, right. So it's everyone. And the funny thing is, in sports psychology, working across not just from, newbies who are just trying to do their first 5K right through to Olympic champions, is that there's often a lot of similarities, mindset or worries or concerns about the things that you want to protect and how you want to be seen. And that really was a bit of a game changer for me as well, recognizing, well, hang on a minute, maybe it isn't just me, but you're the one that has to live in your own body and deal with all the things. And you soon get back into those old patterns that thinking everyone is thinking about you, judging you, commenting on you, and they're really not most of the time, right? That's the thing. And that's really about our relationship, about judgment and how we judge ourselves and how we think other people are judging us.
You worry about what people are saying about you, and then you don't worry about what they're saying, and then you get to your 50s and 60s and you realize nobody was even thinking about you ever.
I know, right?
And it's like,
I know. It's crazy, isn't it? And that's the funny thing is as you age and you sort of grow into yourself psychologically, and you realize that it's often too late physiologically to have the time over, the do-over, right? Oh my God, if only I knew that then. And it's so you've only got to talk about. So tell me, when I speak to athletes and who do have very issues with self-judgment and failure, is that you often, if you ask them about, friends of theirs or people they know on the racing scene, and you ask them about, so tell me about, what their confidence, their view of what these other people, their competitors are confident, and they don't, well, I don't know, maybe, yeah. And then you get a sense of the flippancy or the superficiality with which we look at other people or try and do a deep dive into other people's heads. They're doing the same to you.
Yes.
Exactly. Not at all.
Yes.
So it becomes one of those things. One of my sort of, if I could have a magic wand, one of the things I would love to be able to do is to say, especially at the start of races, is if you could just have a little thought bubbles that would percolate up in the air above people's heads about so you could read people's minds, you would be shocked, right? I would say, and comforted. Yes. It would be amazing. And then this is, comes back to one of the cornerstones about relationships with failure is about vulnerability. And we all love and bond with other people's vulnerability, yet we are so paranoid about showing it, which is the paradox, right? We all want to portray we're strong, we're confident, or we do this, we do that. But really the way to have long-lasting, trusting, supporting relationships is to be vulnerable and show people your weaknesses and talk about your weaknesses. And then you'll find that the ogres don't come out of the caves and start taunting you and bullying you. They're actually really compassionate to you.
They're on your side. Everybody's got the same. Everybody's dealing with the same, right? I mean,
I know exactly.
One of the favorite things I've had on this show is being able to speak openly about the fact that I felt like I was an insecure teenager, an insecure kid. But the ability, what I was able to do is, because I recognized that as an insecurity pretty early on, is take ownership of it and decide to say, I'm going to use that insecurity as a fuel to be better and do better every single day, right? And I think that comes down to what you're saying. If you can be open with your vulnerabilities, at least to yourself, even if you don't want to share it with others, but understand them, take ownership and use them as fuel. And the other thing I want to, I was thinking about you.
But where did that come from for you though? Because that's quite unusual as a young person to make that.
I wasn't that young when I got, it took me to my mid 30s.
I was 47 when that happened.
Exactly. I was last one. No, I think for me, it was meeting Laura, my wife.
Yeah.
So it was finding a partner that I could be 100% myself with, and never feel judged. And so that was in 2000. And if you look at my career, the 10 years prior to that were reasonable, but there was a lot of, I was all over the place, to be honest. And I wasn't loving my job because I was just so nervous and judgmental and self-doubt. But I think there's, to your point earlier, I think having the combination of the consistent physical behavior, so my preparation became very good, but then also combine that with the emotional and mental growth that I got through that 2000 and 2005 type period. That's when my winning score went right through the roof because I just started taking ownership of who I was. But I think having a partner was massive for that.
That's huge.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say, mate, I still got a long way to go, by the way. When I mention these things, I also want to have a caveat that, look, I still often, self-doubt and struggle and, wondering what I'm doing. I'm in a tech startup business with the most brilliant minds I've seen and been around. And I'm like, shit, what am I doing here? And you're constantly going, well, just keep turning up and play the game the best you can.
Isn't it funny though? I mean, imposter syndrome, or feeling like a bit of a fraud, or feeling like you're going to be discovered, or being that everyone is smarter or more competent than you. And obviously, there's a section of society, particularly narcissists, who don't think that, but the majority of us do. And the more people I speak to, either personally or professionally, when you really, because I'm in the weeds of people's heads, right, on a daily basis, or I was certainly before I moved into screenwriting, and you learn that no one has their shit together, really. And not just that no one has their shit together, maybe the human condition is that no one will ever, nor should, have their shit together. We're all trying to figure stuff out as we go along. And we spend so much time and money and therapy trying to reach this sort of magical nirvana state where you're strong, and, I'm strong, I'm confident, I'm beautiful, and, in the mirror, and you believe that inside and you're portraying that. But that's a total myth. Again, unless you have a clinical disorder. But people don't. They're constantly plagued by self-doubt. And that's the human condition, where you understand a bit of evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology about our drives to be part of a tribe, and the them and using and stuff. So it's a natural human drive to want to try and fit in.
Was that the inspiration behind your book, The Brave Athlete?
Well, not so much that specific thing, but I think that after coaching, because Lesley and I co-coach athletes, Lesley obviously doing most of the physical stuff, but mental, again, back to my first point about psychology, look through everything through a psychological lens, is that, listening to how athletes talked about their performances and the things, I found myself, it's almost like cutting and pasting the same advice for people about these sorts of things. I thought maybe instead of doing this, we should write a book about it. But we wanted to have a book that was, because Lesley's experience with sports psychology or sports science in general was the sports science coaching boom in the 90s, but certainly in the UK, was sort of the sports science bean counters, right? They didn't really have much of a bedside manner, and you got treated like a spreadsheet or an email address or a data point. And in psychology, when you're learning or training, most of your work is sort of textbook based. Yeah, you use case studies and internships, but the majority of it is psychological theory based. And when you're out in the wild with real humans, a lot of that stuff just doesn't fly. I mean, I think in theory it works, but it makes sense, but you have to sort of mold your style a little bit. And I think that really became marrying a professional athlete, peeking behind the curtain of all of the insecurities and the vulnerabilities was really comforting. And it changed me as a psychologist, certainly, about how to help other athletes. So that was really, really a big sort of moment in my professional career, marrying a professional athlete.
You get to be right deep inside, right? It's like, it's not the 1 hour a week or whatever, you'd normally get in a therapy session. It's kind of like really peeking behind the curtains. And I kind of feel like that's what Laura is for me. She's like my pocket psychologist, my pocket chiropractor. She's basically peeking behind, this guy that's trying to take on the world and is, like I said earlier, trying to just push me back in the ring. But I think if you ask Laura, you and Laura could probably have a great conversation about trying to just keep these Laura was also an athlete in her own right, but she always she seems to always have her shit together, to be honest. I'm like, she's like, and she used to say, Greg, I used to watch you race in the 90s, and I knew if you could just take your head off your shoulders a little bit and just calm, to your point earlier, calm the down in the title of the book, you'll be set to go. But mate, what I love about the book is you break it down and you talk about 3 brains, the chimp, professor, and computer brains. Tell me about those? Yeah,
so I mean, right off the bat, and this is the sort of the little science voice in me, is that the huge caveat of this is one of the things that we've learned is that in science is that the brain doesn't actually work in sort of zones, right? There's the left brain, right brain. From this part of your brain does this, that, but we now know that the brain is really a set of networks and algorithms, right? It's so interconnected. But I think for when you're trying to talk to, real people and give them actionable, real solutions, you need metaphors, and I'm a huge fan of teaching through metaphor, even though that you're going to simplify the science and even sort of fudge the science to a certain extent, because the goal here for much of this is not to try and say, well, does the prefrontal cortex actually do well? Okay, so let's set that aside. Most athletes or, people who aren't trained in psychology don't really care. They just say, look, I just want to feel better. I want to have more confidence. And so when you have metaphors that are sort of somewhat aligned with the biology, you do find that there are patterns, networks and patterns in the brain that do lend themselves towards things like sort of how you process emotion, how that you think about those initial reactions to things that aren't the actual when you've had a chance to stop and think about them. So there is a sort of an organizing, planning, thinking, analyzing part, and there's a reacting, emotional part. And where in the brain that happens is less important now to me than just sort of thinking about it a little bit more functionally. So in that sense, this sort of 3-system way of thinking about the brain, you've got this fairly analytical planning, what they often call executive function in the brain that does seem to happen in the frontal part of your head, so behind your eyes. That frontal cortex part does seem to be involved, and that has been developing over years and years, and is getting more and more. It's getting smaller, actually, just because it's getting more efficient, but it's getting more sophisticated and more powerful. And then you've got the parts of our brain, and we call that the professor brain, because it's smart and analytical. It's kind of the accountant, as it were, for want of a better word, can always know the right thing to do. And this is the things that when you find yourself saying, I should do this, this is the frontal cortex, right? This is the executive function, the professor brain. We all know that you should do this, but what I actually want to do. So we know intuitively that we've got two sides of ourselves in that sense. But right in the center of your brain, there's something called the limbic system, and it's a really complex part, about the size, a little bit bigger than an avocado. And it really processes emotions and these, our fight or flight responses. It's the probably the oldest part of our brain, and it has very simple needs. It wants to keep you alive. It wants you to procreate, or I should say, not even that part. It just wants you to have pleasure, and its relationship with those sorts of things. So these two parts of our brain we call the chimp brain, because it does act a little bit impulsively, but it's immensely strong. You can't arm wrestle your chimp brain using your professor brain. So no amount, when you're scared and terrified or nervous, no amount of sort of rational thought seems to work. Now, there are some caveats to that, and there's a whole school of therapy called cognitive behavior therapy that tries to do that and does it well under certain circumstances. But under conditions of high stress, especially, that middle part of your brain, that chimp brain, is running the show. It's 5 times stronger, 5 times quicker. It processes sensory information much, much quicker. It sets off a cascade of hormones and neurotransmitters to get you ready to run, to fight, to whatever. And that train has already left the station before your lazy and quite slow executive function part, Professor Brain, has even realized what's going on. And so it is a battle that's going on all the time. And this is what imposter syndrome, or in fact, most of the things that we are unhappy about or that we want to be better at psychologically or for the internal world. I want to feel better. I don't want to feel like this. I want to feel excited, but I'm shitting my pants. This isn't fun. I used to be a sprint hurdler as a kid, and I gave up eventually because I would just be throwing up before race. It was just, this is not pleasant. Why is that? And so that relationship between these two parts of our head is at the heart of almost all of our internal battles, fighting between parts of our brain, networks and algorithms, elements of our brain that really have competing interests. And then there's obviously another part of our brain we call the computer brain. And actually, even this sort of tripartite structure wasn't even our own. We labeled it that, but a guy called Steve Peters, if you've heard of him, a forensic psychiatrist and who's worked in sport for many years, label this. Lots of people have labeled, lizard brain, elephant rider. There's lots of little labels for this that's sort of having this separate structure. But then there's a part of us that can sort of do things automatically. We can talk about what was on TV last night while we're driving, and I'm not really thinking about braking or accelerating or changing gear because I'm doing it automatically. So there is a part of our brain that can kind of run on autopilot. So we call this the computer brain. And so this is filling up our computer brain. Think of it a bit like a hard drive. The moment you're born, it's really laying down memories and experiences to pull back in to help us make sense of the world with our other two brains. And so when we find ourselves in challenging situations or when we want to get better at something, at the heart of it is trying to manage the relationship between these two things. So when I need to cope with discomfort and pain, how can I just go on autopilot and not think about it? Or what things can I say to myself or do so I don't get down the rabbit hole of rumination and worry, or I don't get over emotional when someone cuts me off and I want to get out the car. I just want to keep moving. And how do I suddenly forget just the most basic skills? Why are people running out of transition with their bike helmet still on in the run and, without their number, or, these schoolboy or schoolgirl errors? And it's because there's sometimes when we try and bring things that are on autopilot or should be into sort of conscious thought, or stress forces us to that, we make these silly mistakes. That's what choking is, essentially. That's what a whole host of other things that we just can't think straight. We do a big presentation and we're quite stressed or nervous and we know the information, but yet suddenly your mind goes blank and you can't remember anything. Well, why is that? So those sorts of things are really helpful for understanding. So the functional part is, okay, if you want to get a handle on wrangling this internal experience, we need to know that your brain has different demands to get you away from danger, from harm. But I also want to do it because I know it's good for me and I should do it. And I do enjoy it after the fact. You can time travel with the professor brain, you can't with the chimp brain, and so on. But the heart of it is managing those relationships. So a lot of the strategies outside of the physiologic ones really are about the relationship, letting your brain bits, your meat computer, talk to itself and manage itself with some calm. Okay, I've got this. Don't worry. I know you're nervous. This is the self-talk part. I know that you're terrified. I know that you don't want to be embarrassed, but don't worry. I've got this. Everything's going to be okay. The sun is still going to shine. You're not going to drown. No one's going to die. So managing that and what strategies are the most effective for managing that relationship in real time is the challenge.
Oh, well, that's what we're going to have to talk about right now. I mean, these strategies, because, that was fantastic, by the way, a really great description. And I love the way you tell a story. So now it sticks. I'm somebody that has to listen to a story to actually understand. And you did a great job. So when you think about this, the computer brain, the autopilot, is that possible to train it up in a way for most things that you can be, like if you keep doing something, routine habit, we often talk about that, that you can override the sympathetic brain, if you want to call it, or the limbic system, as you said. Can you make that computer brain more powerful in a way? I don't know if I'm using the right terminology, but... Yeah,
no, you can. In fact, you can start to automate certain things, and anybody who's been an endurance athlete knows this, right? You speak to someone who's just started out and you're talking about spending more than 45 minutes or 30 minutes on the stationary trainer. Oh my God, how do you do that? Or what do you and then after a while, you've done it for so many years, you learn, your brain and your body knows how to cope with it. You know what's coming. You learn some little tricks and strategies along the way to help it. So you can use some distraction, of course. That's the easiest way for to get into autopilot, whether it's sort of watching movies or listening to podcasts while you're doing difficult things, or just simple things like counting to yourself or singing a sort of a very rote, repetitive chorus of a song in your own head is a great way to get into computer brain mode. So yes, there are lots of things that you can do, but the essence of turning something into an autopilot or a habit or sort of not overthinking it is one, having the skill, the thing that you're trying to do, be practice. So you've already got the skill, you've done it over and over and over again. And your brain will naturally, the more you do something, your brain wants to put it into a computer brain oversight or mode. Because listen, if we make so many decisions every day, and even though it's a bit of a myth that we make, 35,000 decisions a day or something, but it's a lot, right? And most of those, and your brain would melt down and start fuming, smoking if it had to actually think about every little thing. So we automate it. That's your brain's way of giving an easy life in internal world, right? So anything with practice over time will eventually become automated. automated, assuming there's not too much reliance on the professor brain. If I'm having to do calculus, I can't often do that in my computer brain. Some people can, they can just do it rote, but most people will struggle because it needs executive functions to be able to do it. But for things like tolerance of discomfort, pushing through or getting through hard times or not worrying about things, absolutely you can. And what we do know about habit formation, the neuroscience of habit formation now tells us that it's not about how many times you do something, also the number of times, I rephrase. It's not how long it takes, it's how many repetitions. So people say, it takes 3 months for it to be a habit or 6 months. That's not true at all. In fact, the science has disproven that. What does show is that it's the frequency with which you do things that's important. So this is why if you want to make something like exercise a habit, or something that's you don't really enjoy a habit, like the parts of writing that I will wake up and I just don't want to write, I'm not feeling creative, I've got to make it a habit. So you set these tiny goals. I'm just going to do 10 minutes a day. Same for exercise, same for writing. Small, manageable, repetitive things where you're removing the barriers to doing them is the way that you actually, the kind of the little entryway or the portal to turn those things into habits.
I love looking at the habit formation in small micro doses too, because I think we often hear people go, I'm going to start something 3 times a week. I'm going to do, 30 minutes of, I'm like, whoa, back it down. Smaller little goals, make it habitual. What are the strategies then? I'm thinking about it especially when we get hit that fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system. What can we do when we're in that state?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot actually, and the ones that I'm really interested in, obviously evidence-based strategies, but even then, when there isn't scientific evidence for saying, okay, I want you to, look in the mirror and say this to yourself and jump up and down and say the national anthem backwards or whatever it is, the new thing of the day that the self-help guru. Some of those things, just because there isn't evidence yet, doesn't mean they don't work or they're not effective. We just might not have studied them enough yet. But if there's some sort of biological underlying reason or pathway that might explain it, that's usually good enough for me to start using it with athletes. So I don't need a randomized controlled trial necessarily to say, okay, if you breathe like this and say this to yourself and, start tapping your thumbs.
Isn't it 700 minus 7? And you just got to keep going down. I'm actually pretty good at it, by the way.
Oh, yeah, right.
I've done it that many times.
In terms of what, discomfort or?
Well, no, just trying to get yourself to neutral, trying to calm yourself down.
Yeah, middle gear. Yeah. Well, there's a number of ways, and this is actually very different. So here's the interesting thing about your the relationship between the two brains. So your limbic system, your chimp brain, whilst it is a screaming, tantruming toddler in a grocery store, supermarket, which it will. You can't, you have to bribe them, distract them. That's the way our brain is. But they also it feels so intensely. So music, for example, and the role of music for our chimp. Music is chimp porn, right? It really is. Porn is also porn to the chimp, but music is, and you can really influence. So, and it's funny now. This is talking about the crossover between sports psychology or performance psychology and screenwriting. Is that when you watch a good movie and there's a great soundtrack or a great score, it can change the experience for you. The soundtrack of a movie can often make the movie without you even realizing it. I loved it. This is what There's so many. I know we're kind of switching into different disciplines here, but the point is that your limbic system, your chimp brain, you've kind of got to tease it, give it a bit of foreplay, give it what it wants, but not too much.
Distract it. Distraction is key.
Exactly. So having good playlists or having good soundtracks are great ways of just getting your chimp brain calm, to not have it tantruming, getting it sort of. We often talk about exercising your chimp. It needs to, if it needs an outburst, if it needs to tell you that it's terrified and scared, the more you try and shut it down and say, no, I've got this, no, I'm good, I'm confident, I'm kind of, the mantras over and over, they often don't work because this part of your brain has been given biochemical powers to force you to listen to it because its primary goal is to keep you alive. Yeah. So it's really tough. So you've got to really use some sort of cloak and dagger tactics with it. And so for some people, that's music. For some people, it might just be talking a lot. It's funny because when people get nervous, some people withdraw and get quiet. Some people become chatterboxes. These are all windows to how their chimp brain is trying to naturally self-regulate. And so when you learn that, the difficulty is when you're around someone who is the opposite, right? I need quiet. That person's a chatterbox. So you're making me anxious and they're calming down. And then I'm not responding to them. So they think that you're pissed off with them. So that affects them. So it's this incompatibility with how you're trying to self-regulate. So for me, reading actually is a way that I can self-regulate a lot. But music as well. Lesley is all about music. That's the one way that she self-regulates a lot, and through repetitive exercise, of course, as well. And when I say repetitive, I don't just mean, over and over again. I'm talking about exercises that have a sort of a closed skill, cycling and running, right? It's the same little pattern repeated. Oh, it's almost like auto-hypnotic. So those sorts of things, why meditation can help as well. So so trying to manage that well by learning what works for you is really helpful. So and a lot of the time when you ask people, so what works for you, they don't really know. So you say, well, tell me about some of your great performances, or when everything went well, and they said, well, if they haven't, some of them haven't had any go well. So, okay, tell me about a time in your life that you just remember, this was great. Oh, I was on holiday with my family and we were water skiing or whatever. And so you're trying to unpack the elements that created that feeling of stillness, of calmness, of confidence, or I could do anything. And then that's a little entry point to then trying to know which strategies might work for them versus somebody else.
A quick mini break to tell you about Any Question, the ultimate knowledge sharing platform. You can listen to thousands of the world's greatest experts share their content. You can also ask them any questions. Go check it out, anyquestion.com/Greg Bennett. That's anyquestion.com/Greg Bennett. And you can download it on iOS or Android. I think all of this is fascinating, and I'm kind of thinking about the moments I had in my life personally, and I know others are experiencing it, listeners, when you've packed up your transition and you're making your way over to the start line, and, it's 20 minutes to race start and the national anthem's going, and you're in this heightened state of arousal, right? It's like the helicopters above, and, you have these moments like, okay, I have to win this race, or whatever it means to you to win. But, and it's like this. What advice do you have for people that feel overwhelmed in that? What are some of the tools?
So the first thing would be, on a very general sense, is a present focus, being in the here and now, not what. And your professor brain can time travel. It's the only part of our brain that can. In fact, we think we might be the only mammal that can do that. Wow. We can dream forward, we can reminisce, but we can think about all of the things that could, should, maybe happen. And it gets us into tremendous difficulties and problems. It's the sort of the kryptonite of the athlete, is mentally time traveling to outcomes that you have no control over, or may not happen. So it's really staying present. So then this comes back to controlling physiology. So the number one thing, and so the model that I teach and I use for my athletes is, if you really think about the 5 core, your brain and central nervous system is really running, and really what you think and feel is what we call an emergent property of your physiology. If you're stressed and nervous, you're likely to have the outside world or seem to be moving at a much faster rate. You'll feel rushed. You'll forget things because of how the memory works under those sorts of things. So we need to try and calm our physiology so that the techniques that we then do try and use have a much better chance of working. So calming your physiology. So one of the quickest and best, and the credit for this goes to a number of scientists, but the person who's really talked about this a lot is Andrew Huberman. If you've seen or heard of Andrew Huberman, Stanford neuroscientist. The physiologic sigh breath, S-I-G-H breath, if you've heard of this before, or cyclic breathing, is a fantastic way of calming down our nervous system within 15 seconds. It's quick. We should be teaching, elementary school children this from a very early age. And the curious thing about breathing, because anyone who's had some sense of meditation or try, they know that, oh yes, I have to breathe, and box breathing and all these other sorts of breathing. Why about breath breath? Is it just trying to trick my brain? Well, actually, no. There are some connections between, for example, our diaphragm, that big band of muscle at the bottom of our thoracic area, is a phrenic nerve that goes to neurons in our brain that control anxiety and stress, and that communicates with our amygdala and all the stress centers. So there's these connections between automatic processes that we can turn into some control. So we can control our breathing. It's very hard to control your heart rate or your pancreas or your spleen, but you can actually control your breath. And because your breath and how you breathe, the pattern of your breathing, has a huge impact on how you think and feel, and vice versa, you can sort of use it as a kind of a hack with a small h. And so one of those is a phrenic, is a physiological side breath. And what this means is that you breathe in through your nose twice, one on top of the other. This is where video would help, I suppose. So it's like, if you heard that. So what you're doing there, I'll talk through the breath about why this works. So obviously, when you're breathing in, you've got these little alveoli sacs in your lungs, and they inflate, and some of them sort of like partially inflate. Some of them are like all deformed or muted. Some of them don't inflate at all. And there's a surface tension to them as well. So just like when you're blowing up a balloon, you have to kind of break that surface tension, then it suddenly inflates, after you harden and it gets easier to breathe. Well, the alveoli in our lungs are a little bit similar as well. So when you actually take one breath on top of another, inhale on top of another, you get a much better expanded inhalation. And of course, we know that not just a lot of things are happening in the capillary beds around that, about all the stuff that's being transported, carbon dioxide and oxygen, but also just about having good oxygenation. So having two internal breaths through your nose, you're holding it for the amount of time that you've breathed in for those two nasal inhales, and then you're breathing out through your mouth for double the length of the inhale. So this is what it sounds like. I almost said it looks like. It's what it sounds like. And that physiologic side breath, now we know, is connecting breath patterns, the diaphragm, the pressure on your heart, how your heart shrinks and expands with the pressure in your chest cavity with these inhalations and exhalations, sending messages to neurons at the top of our brainstem that are communicating with our amygdala. And so there's a whole host of biological, real, tangible things that are happening when you breathe in this pattern that are helping our sympathetic nervous system, sort of just like your parasympathetic, you're pumping the brakes a little bit on those adrenaline, the gas pedal, the sympathetic nervous system. So when you breathe in this pattern like this, in fact, there's a general rule for breath work as a sort of an overarching sort of way of thinking about it. When you focus on exhalation in a breath, that was an exhalation focused breath because I'm breathing out for twice as long. It's activating more parasympathetic, calming neural responses. When you focus on inhalation, so this is like Wim Hof, Lamar's, like a lot of that, you're actually increasing adrenaline and cortisol. You're increasing activation, so that can make you either anxious or nervous, or I just need more motivation. I need to get out of bed. I'm struggling. Put whatever, I need to see in the snooze. You want to do sharp, quick inhalations. But when I want to calm down, I want to make it exhalation focused. So the exhalation is a lot longer than the inhale function. So it's a great strategy for calming down in the moment. And so you only need to do it like 2 or 3 times. After about 2 or 3 times, you don't get any more benefit. But it's the quickest way to calm your nervous and your brain and central nervous system down that you can. And then, lo and behold, you start, your field of vision changes, the likelihood of making these little stupid errors, the schoolboy mistakes or schoolgirl mistakes that we talked about earlier, start to reduce the likelihood of that happening. You can see a bit more clearly because your field of vision, you're not foveating. As we say in neuroscience, is that you get kind of tunnel vision. Your attention field narrows when cortisol and stress is up. So I want to be in a calm, centered, present place. And that's the easiest and quickest way to get in it, doing that little breath pattern.
Oh, that is fascinating. I've never heard it explained that way. And the different inhalation versus escalation. Exhalation. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it's something that I want to be able to use. And then is there a bit of a that's almost a physiological side. Is there then do you preach word affirmations or anything to sort of, my wife was always very good at this. I'd be like, are you feeling, stressed before the race or nervous? You say, are you feeling nervous? And she turned to me always cool as a cucumber, be like, no, I'm excited. Right?
I know, isn't that funny?
They're the two exact same things.
I know. This is like I know. And it's funny because dopamine, and we can talk about dopamine if you wish, but as a neurotransmitter, in the presence of adrenaline and stress or sort of that cortisol, that stress response, when there's dopamine present as well, it feels like excitement. Yeah. But when it's not present, it feels like anxiety. So this is why some people love roller coasters and scary movies and other people hate them. It's when you add a different neurotransmitter, even though they're all there all the time, that's the sort of the small print. Yeah. But in a metaphorical, broad nutshell sense, it's that when you introduce sort of neurotransmitters, or you try and like get microdosed with dopamine, like having a laugh, like cracking a joke under stress, brings in a dopaminergic response. It makes everything feel better. It's actually an adrenaline antagonist as well. So any chance you can get to do that, that's why then listening to music, some people like to have self-affirmations or self-mantras. It really doesn't so much matter what the thing is, but the key thing, and this is a really interesting little feature when they've tried to study, so what are the things that I should be saying to myself when I'm trying to get ready for a performance, and or what should I be thinking about? The evidence suggests that it's not so much what you should be thinking about, it's what you shouldn't be thinking about. In other words, maybe it doesn't matter too much whether I'm saying, I've got my little mantra that I'm saying to myself. All that means is that you're not doing the tendency to time travel. You're not thinking about oh my God, so-and-so's here. I didn't know she was going to be here. Oh my God, that's great. I'm already now racing for second or whatever, I'm not going down that line. So you're kind of running interference on some of these other things that we know impact performance in a negative way. So I'm reluctant to sort of say, okay, here's the magical phrase that you say to yourself. The essence is get your physiology in a calm state using breath work, which is a huge part. The other thing then might be to say, have a soundtrack, listen to something that helps your chimp brain get into that mode. It might be a sort of a German techno if you're Lesley. It might be a classical concerto or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's kind of in tune with that sense of yourself that stops you worrying forward, backwards, what coulda, shoulda. It's only about being in that moment. So that's really the heart of it. And that's a battle. It's really, you have to practice it to be able to do it well. So I would say if you're just trying to do this, oh my God, I'm listening to this podcast, I'm going to try this race on Saturday. And oh my God, it didn't really work. Or it worked for a little bit. That isn't. Of course it doesn't. It's like saying, well, I'm going to teach you topspin tennis serve today and I want you to use it in a match on Saturday. It's like, wait, what? I've only just figured out that I need to change my grip. And so you've got to practice it over time in increasingly more stressful situations. So that's one element, I guess, of learning how to cope with high stakes, high pressure moments. And knowing, I will say that, coming back to the physiology piece, your eyes and your ears, also smell and taste as well, and a whole bunch of other sort of senses that are coming in, is bombarding your nervous system with saying, look at me, think about me, I'm over here, you really should think about that, right? We get assaulted by light, sounds all the time. And this is happening at lightning speeds before your brain can even process it, right? So what we need to do is the perception of those senses, what we shine our flashlight, our torch on, which of those things I should be focusing on is really important. So the psychological strills are really less about control. Yes, you can control your ears and your eyes, your Michael Phelps, your headphones and the hoodie and the glasses, trying to limit the sensory input, which is everyone should be doing anyway. But then what you decide to shine the light on. So in other words, if I am noticing something or I see something or I get angry at something, I'm racked here or someone's taken my spot or in a transition sense, or it can be anything, things that aren't going right. Your senses are going to be screaming at you to go down a little rabbit hole. And you've got to resist those at all costs. You've got to try and keep back on a particular focus that's keeping you in the present. So that's why it helps if, for example, you've learned the way to control your ears and your eyes. And then you've got some little thing. It might be a memory or a great race that you've had in the past, or one that we teach our athletes is you don't have to feel good to have a good race. So to try and separate how I feel now versus how I'm going to do. Those two things are often completely independent, right? Some of our best races have been when I felt I had the flu the night before, or I got up and this was hurting or that wasn't working. And so once you start to get into that mindset of nothing really matters what's happened to me, how I woke up this morning, what I'm feeling, what will be, will be. If I can just focus on the process, and this is all coming back to presentism, if that's a phrase in this context, of being in the moment, is about what do I need to do in the next 1 minute to be the best version of myself. You could think of the dream performance by your dream athlete in the dream circumstances. What would they do in this next minute that's right in front of me? What would they do? And so you can draw on other people's influences, you can draw on memories that you've got, you can talk to yourself. It doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to keep myself in this moment and only focus on what's the best version of myself in this moment. What would they do in this moment? And so that really becomes practice. It becomes preparation, like knowing when you're in this situation, what do you think is going to, okay, so you've got this, you're walking through, take Lesley at the World Championships, she's walking through, we're trying to think of every scenario that could derail her, thinking, a goggles snap as she's walking down to the beach, she forgets this, or she stubs her toe, or her swim cord snap, or whatever. What would you do then? You've got to have contingency plans for them. And once you've got all these contingency plans for them, it frees your brain up a little bit to stop worrying, because no matter what gets thrown at me, I've got a little plan to help get through it. And then I can get back to focusing on the warm up, the blah, blah, all the phases of how I can be the best version of myself in that moment. And that's really the essence of it.
That was fantastic, mate. I'm jotting down notes here as much for myself more than anything. And these days it's not so much about start lines in races, but it's more about giving presentations and, speaking engagements that I do. And I love them and I hate them. I like doing
for presentations and stuff, physiologic sigh breathing, cyclic sigh breathing. Yeah. It's called, I should say, SIGH. It's called sigh breathing, is because when we sigh, physiologically, when something is just this big that's just happened, and it's a natural mammal, all other animals do it as well after they've eaten or have had sex. We do it in our sleep. We often do it when we just kind of something. When we do that physiologically, it's Mother Nature's neural inbuilt mechanism for calming down and saying to our brain, it's okay, it's over, everything's going to be fine. So all we're doing is we're proactively using that sigh, that mechanism, by doing this little breath pattern. So it's great for just about to walk onto stage. Do that under your breath. Fantastic. It really works.
Oh, mate. These tools and strategies you've just talked about, I'm already now I'm excited about, okay, I'm ready. I've got a few more, because you just need to have a few of these tools. So then you can go practice, to your point earlier, it's about preparation, but the breathing, the music, get yourself to neutral. I love when you said, it's not don't be thinking about what I should be thinking about, think about what you should not be thinking about and get that sorted, and then be present. Just be present in this moment.
There's another great physiologic tool as well for calming that stress response. It's got a really awkward sounding name. It's called self-generated optic flow. It's neuroscience, so it's awful. But the bottom line is that what our eyes focus on, the pattern of how our eyes track, is really important, because the back of your eyeballs, there's a little called the neural retina. It's about the width of a credit card on the back of your eyeballs, indistinguishable from brain tissue. Your eyeballs pop out at the end of your first trimester out of our skull. So originally they were part of our brain, and they're actually communicating with these stress neural pathways, the amygdala and all these fight or flight response pathways in the brain, without us even knowing it. And what visual neuroscientists have discovered is that when you start to track your eyesight left to right or right to left, basically a parallel to the horizon and on the horizon, we activate these calming parasympathetic responses.
No way.
So when you're walking through time and space, so your eyes can sense that your field of vision is moving past you, you're just walking or running, and you're tracking your eyes across the horizon, left to right, right to left, you're activating these neural pathways to calm down. But what do we do when we get stressed or nervous? We narrow our attention, we go into our phones, we try and go on a TikTok, distraction or whatever. It's often, or we're exercising inside on a treadmill, or we're looking at a screen. It's making the problem worse. So when you can, if you're in those moments just before a presentation and you have a moment to just kind of got 5 minutes, what should I do? And you're in a hotel about to give a presentation, I would be trying to get outside, having a little walk, even if it's just backwards and forwards, 50 yards back, scanning the horizon and doing my physiologic sigh breathing. That would be the quickest way physiologically to calm down. These are all evidence-based strategies. These isn't sort of hoodoo voodoo. In fact, I will say the eye tracking part now has been built into one of the foremost and most encouraging treatments for PTSD. It's called EMDR therapy, eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. And it's this notion that when your eyes start tracking left to right on the horizon, we are instantly put into a calmer state, and we can talk about things that are stressful without being limbic chimp brain activated or agitated as much. It's really, really helpful.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, mate. This is really, really incredible. I'm going to have to just keep having you get back every 6 months on the show if for my own therapy. This is.
That's right.
I'm kind of sitting here going, man, if I'd had Simon in my corner for the 25 years of my racing career, it would have been really helpful. How many athletes are you actually working with beyond Lesley? Have you?
Well, obviously we're winding down my psych stuff. So we coach triathletes. We've got about 25 at the moment, but But I have my own sideline of athletes who have their own coaches. They just come to me for psychology. I'm winding that down just because of screenwriting and film now. But so these are the sorts of things that you're talking about.
I want to talk about that before I let you go. I know I've kept you for a while, but I want to talk about it and shift the gear into the screenwriting and just tell me, that process and some of the obstacles and challenges you faced during that. I know Lesley gave me a bit of a rundown, but I'd love to hear it from your point of view.
So it's funny because, as an academic, you're a writer, really. You're just a science writer. You're writing grants, you're writing publications, you're writing, you're reading and writing papers and so on. And so you write for a living, essentially. And I've always liked creative storytelling, but never creative writing. I never thought of myself as a creative writer. And then when we started with the All Quiet journey, and Lesley with her first writing partner was struggling with this draft of the script, and they asked if I would sort of try and help out. And one of the things that after spending so many times, so much of my life, professional life, working with athletes or working with just people who are in what we call achievement situations, and not all of my clients are athletes, you find that one of your jobs is understanding subtext. You telling me this, but is that what you actually think and feel?
I love it.
And so that's what you're trying to get the bottom of. Tell me, you're trying to get the truth out of someone, or what was really, I want a front row seat to your head, not just a front row seat to your mouth. So I when you do this in screenwriting, and one of the arts of good, certainly dialogue and character, is about subtext, right? It's about what people say versus what they actually mean. And so that always came quite naturally to me, not naturally because I've been doing it, trained in it and so on. So when I started to help out the dialogue piece, and they would say this and how they would respond was just like, well, that's what they would say. And so that became how I sort of segued into screenwriting, because that came I didn't have any training in story architecture or how narrative stories unfold, but I've since taken some classes on that, and Lesley is trained on that. So that's why our partnership works so well in screenwriting.
Wow.
And I just love it. It's, storytelling is the way that we for millennia have communicated and understood ourselves, understood the world. And it became a way that you can really shift belief patterns. I really do. I think now, after all this psychology work, maybe it's storytelling is one of the secrets to changing the way we think about ourselves and the world.
I think you've absolutely nailed it here. I'm going to put on my psychology hat, and I'm looking at you. And just this 1 hour we've spent together, one of your greatest strengths is your ability to tell stories, to learn from. And it's what I want from this show, honestly. It's like, I'm not somebody that likes to interview by going, okay, here's 10 questions, boom, boom, boom. What I want is to just hear your journey and hear a story. And you do that so well. And so it makes perfect sense when you think about the ability for you to tell stories, to understand the human brain and the way we operate. And you almost know what people are going to say next. You're like the AI. You're like,
is, after spending years teaching, when you have to teach when you have to teach 350 undergrads or 500 undergrads now in the US, these academic stadia, and some of which are not your majors, they're just taking a class, and it becomes sort of a form of edutainment, as I used to call it. It's like, and really learning like executive function, professor brain stuff, facts and theories, and the way into someone, the way to make that easier is you talk to their chimp. They think they're in there to get, smart in their professor brain. They are, but you're really communicating to, and storytelling is chimp porn, right? We talk about that. It's the way that your chimp feels. It can relate to emotion. It can relate to wants and desires and needs, which is what storytelling is. It doesn't relate so much to goals and facts. It relates to the much more emotional side of it. And so when you pair those two together, facts and knowledge with wants and desires, and you can align them, which is what good teaching really is. That's the essence of to me, about really human growth. That's the way that we truly internalize stuff and feel passionate about it. And I think over the years, I learned that rather than it's a performance in every sense of the word. And if you can get people on board emotionally, it makes all the other stuff. Think of all your favorite teachers and professors that you've had in your life. At the essence of it, if you were to dig down, the reason you probably like them is because they had a way of communicating kind of difficult stuff in a way that made sense to you. And the scientific unearthing of that is they're really doing sort of limbic system, communication. That's what that is. And so if you can do that in story, it's very, very powerful.
Wow. So, you've done that with the screenwriting, All Quiet on the Western Front. Anybody who hasn't seen it, go see it. It's it really is an amazing film. What are your sort of future projects? Can you share anything yet, or is it all a bit hush-hush?
Quite a few actually on the cards now, some of which are... And we wanted to try and find some lighter material. All Quiet is a pretty dark film. It's a tough watch. It's an important film. It's a tough watch. And your chimp doesn't come away necessarily feeling happy, excited, or uplifted. But you do feel about, the futility of war and the danger. But so we want to tell stories. We still really gravitate to stories of human resilience, human spirit, how that you make sense of hardship and how you learn through hardship, and how we shouldn't be avoiding suffering and feeling bad and sort of putting us. Some people don't have a choice. I'm not talking about people who are in situations where their life is hard and they're suffering. I'm talking about for people who are trying to find a way to connect with stories that make sense to them, but they've led pretty much, fairly privileged middle-class lifestyles, which many of us have, that I think that we tend to avoid suffering. We tend to avoid discomfort. And so I love the idea of stories that show out of hardship and discomfort, you can actually not just survive it, but you can thrive and be better because of it. So we've got a few stories that are in that vein. One that we're really excited is about Ernest Shackleton.
Get out. I was about to say that book. I was about to say you should do endurance.
I know, that's it. That might be one of our next films. So we're deep in the weeds of the Ernest Shackleton's story now.
If people haven't read that, go read it. It's phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's just like mind-blowing. It's funny because when you look at Antarctic explorers, the ones that some people know about, Scott and Amundsen, and so they all have very different personalities and they're all very different styles. You've got the real tactician, the planning person of Amundsen, and then you've got the sort of the much more sort of military hierarchical order of Scott, and then you've got this visceral, emotional, charismatic leader that's rough around the edges of Shackleton. And they always say that all these explorers have since said that if you are caught in the ice, you want Shackleton with No Hope. You want Shackleton rather than the other two, because they're going to be the ones that really, he's a limbic system whisperer, right? Chimp whisperer. And that's really what he became as a good leader. So those sorts of stories are really interesting. We've got a psychological thriller set in the Scottish Highlands that we're really interested in as well. Yeah. That's kind of a bit weird and scary and stuff. So, but also has a sort of a fairly beautiful poetic ending. So yeah, there's no a single genre or type of story, but I think at the essence of it, it's about human spirit. It's about relating. Because look, when we watch these films, we're really, as anybody, as audience, we're looking, why do we enjoy cinema so much or movies so much? Is because we're not just we just want to be entertained or distracted. It's because we're learning how to interact with the world. What would I do in that situation? Or, oh God, I could never be in that situation. What would I? And if you've only got to look at what's popular on YouTube now, it's like a lot of survival stories about, or not just stories about, going into the woods and building, surviving in a cabin and trying to be self-reliant and self-sufficient. And not we'd ever want to do that, but we are fascinated with what you would do under those circumstances. So it's like transporting a version of yourself into a new world and say, how would I deal with that? So I love those kinds of stories. I always have been interested in them.
Mate, that's fantastic. I'm super excited for you both. And I know these books are in the right hands with you two. I'm excited about that. That book, Endurance, I couldn't put it down. I was exhausted by the end of it. Just like All Quiet on the Western Front, I think people are going to be exhausted. It's just one where by the end, you get one deep breath right at the end. But just, mate, absolutely fantastic. Before I let you go, I do have just a couple of questions I like to finish with. And that is, first one, what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Oh, gosh. I think it would be, as we spoke about at the beginning, it was that no one actually cares about
yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And you think that everybody is judging and evaluating you, but the main 99% of the judgment evaluation you get is from your own damn head. Yes. And if only you could have, I don't want to swear on your podcast, fewer F's in your bag, right, to give. And unfortunately, age and wisdom gives us that. I love the 80-year-old grandmother who just doesn't give a anymore and sweat. You know what I mean? I love that, but why can't we have a little bit of that when we're younger, so that I could try things that I had avoided because I was too scared to do them or so on.
Yeah, I love. When I first started dating Laura, it was very early on in our relationship. She turns to me and said, "Greg, nobody cares about you." And I was like, what? To hear.
Is that supposed to be a pickup line? Oh my God, what?
But it was like, this is how blunt she can be. She meant it in a very compassionate way. The truth is exactly what you're saying. Nobody cares. People, you have an issue to your face, they might be like, oh yeah, I care. But then they turn around the corner, they've already got their own shit to deal with, right? So that's a great one. I love that. All right, who would you want to have dinner with? Non-family, living or dead? 3 people.
I tell you, one would be one of my writing, artistic crushes, which is a woman called Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I don't know if you know her. She wrote Fleabag and Killing Eve. She's a British writer. Yeah. She's just I love everything about that woman. She's amazing. I'd love to have dinner with her. Probably another one would be Stephen Fry. Do you know Stephen Fry?
Yes.
So I just love his approach to life, to sort of his opinions. He's such a smart guy, but how he thinks about the world just doesn't seem to track with left or right. It just seems, it resonates with me.
I love people like that, where you can't even tell where they stand politically. It doesn't matter. It's just strong education. Yeah, I love Stephen Fry's amazing.
And I love, because he talks a lot about why we shouldn't be concerned about too much about her to worry about other people's feelings, because not in a non-compassionate sense, is that you don't have a right not to be offended, right? I'm sorry, that's not your goal. So I love his take on some of that stuff. It would be a fantastic, such a breadth of knowledge as well. So I'd love to have dinner with him. A third one, actually now, we're in the US, and being a Brit, we have a huge issue with gun violence, and it's an issue that I'm particularly passionate and interested in as well. And so it's probably be someone like James Madison, one of the founders of the Constitution.
What did you mean?
Who wrote the Second Amendment? So what did you actually mean by this? Because I can't tell you, Jimmy boy, the shitstorm that's kicking off because of what you wrote now. What did you actually mean?
Yeah. Let's get to the bottom of it. I just want to chat with you. Yeah. If I took you a couple of 100 years in front here and I told you the types of weaponry we would have, would you change your writing? That'd be a fun conversation.
No, exactly. Right. I mean, and even though the times were so different back then, and what you mean by militia and so on, but if you could somehow transport yourself and describe the world that it would turn into a few hundred years later, what would your sense be of that then? I know they would be the discussions I would love to have.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, there's your three. I've got one more question for you. Yeah. All right, where do you see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, hopefully to have another few successful films under our belt. Yes. But I think more importantly is to be. I'd go to sleep at night excited to get up tomorrow morning to do something, and passion, which I have for this. I think I'm really discovering true passion for the first time in my life, professionally. I mean, I've always known that I've loved what I've done. That's not when Lesley used to say to me, sometimes I can't sleep at night. I'm so excited to get up to train, which was such a foreign thing to me. I'm like, wait, what? People actually think like that? And I've always felt that I'd love to have that. And now I have it. A Sunday is a Tuesday. I just can't wait to get back into reading and writing. And I just love it. So I hope that I'm still doing that and I can find a way to get paid for doing it.
Mate, I can hear it in your voice. I really can. Your passion, your enthusiasm, your knowledge, everything about it. This has been a really fantastic conversation. I truly appreciate you for coming on. So thanks, mate. This is a great place to finish.
My pleasure, Greg. Yeah. Love that. We've been a fan of both of you for many years. And so thank you for having us both on.
Vice versa. I was saying to Lesley on the last episode, I think we've all got to get together at some point here. We'll come over to LA. We do. This way.
Absolutely. We've got some war wounds and skeletons in the closet. I'm sure we'd all have a laugh about.
Absolutely. Well, Simon, I do want to have you on the show maybe in 6 months or so. Again, I think these conversations I think there's a lot of people just so eager to want to learn more about actions they can take to help them with their mental fortitude and everything else. And I think having you come on and be able to share that knowledge has just been fantastic. So thanks again, mate.
My pleasure.
All right. And everybody can find all the show notes and timestamps at bennettendurance.com/media.
Thanks a lot for listening. If you enjoyed the show, your support would truly be appreciated. You can visit the Patreon page, or you can subscribe with your podcast app of choice. Don't miss the next episode, so subscribe and be notified. For show notes, if you want to know more, please visit bennettendurance.com. I'm Phil Liggett, and on behalf of Greg Bennett, here's to the next time, and I hope you will join Greg again very soon.